It was 2009, and Iowa had just legalized gay marriage. And my daughter came to me. She was maybe 9 years old, maybe 10. I can't quite remember. And she asked me a question that I wasn't ready for. And it wasn't a hard question. It wasn't a complicated one. She simply asked me why. Why did we believe that it was wrong? I remember where we were. I remember that look on her face. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't challenging. She genuinely was just asking. She was asking because she wanted to understand the why. And she was coming to her dad because that's what kids do when they still trust you enough to ask the question. And I remember exactly what I said. I looked at her and said, because it is. And that's all you need to know. And she went quiet. Back then, my kids knew not to push me beyond that point. So she nodded and she walked away. I personally thought that I had handled it in that moment. I hadn't. I had just handed her over. This is the Sacred Gentleman podcast. The Sacred Gentleman is a movement that calls men out of comfort and back into God's design. We form leaders of presence, purpose, and generational legacy. I'm Steve Baumgartner, your host. Let's begin. Here's what most people assume about men and cultural confusion. They think the problem is that men don't carry any convictions anymore, that they don't know right from wrong, that if we could just get men to believe in the right things, that the culture would turn around. I want to push back on that a little bit. I had convictions. I knew what I believed. I could have drawn you a map of what was right and what was wrong, and I still failed my kids. Not because I didn't have the right answer, but because I only had half of that answer. I had the what without any sort of why. And guys, let me tell you, half a conviction handed to a child standing at the edge of a very patient and persuasive world, guys, you're not protecting them at that point. It's really a door that has no lock on it at that point. So today we're going to talk about indifference. Not the indifference of a man who doesn't care, but the indifference of men who care just enough to say something, but not enough to back it up. We're going to talk about what it costs at home, at work, in your church, and out in the culture. We're going to talk about what it actually looks like to stand in the fray. And I'm going to tell you about two sets of kids, the same father, but a very, very different man, and what made that difference in between these two. Let's get into it. I was 17 years old when I found out I was going to be a father for the first time. I was 18 when my first son came. She was 17 as well when she was pregnant. We ended up getting married. And even though I made a ton of mistakes, I still did what I thought a man was supposed to do. I went to work every day. I provided. I worked to keep the lights on. That marriage didn't last. I've told you about her in past episodes. I don't believe that it was meant to be, because years later, I remarried to my wife now, the one that I talk about all the time, the one that I'm deeply and madly in love with, the one that I know I was meant to be with. But between us, we had 5 kids. I ended up getting custody of my 3, and she brought 2 as well. And we blended our family. My ex-wife wasn't in the picture anymore, and her ex-husband barely was. So as we were blending these 2 families with all these emotions, it already means that we were navigating more complexity than most people handle in a lifetime. And we like to say that we had faith. You know, we went to church. We had opinions on right and wrong. I had convictions, or at least I thought I did. But guys, what I didn't have was I didn't have any deeper roots to my convictions. I believe things the way that a man believes things when nobody has actually ever challenged him on those beliefs. My beliefs had never been tested. My convictions have never been tested. Nobody had ever sat across the table from me and asked me to defend what I believed and why I believe that way. So I never had to find out whether what I had was a conviction or just a preference with either a religious or a social label stamped on it. And back then I knew that gay marriage was wrong. I knew it was wrong. I could feel it. I knew that the cultural push behind it was absolutely wrong. I could feel it deep down in my gut. But if you had sat me down and said, Steve, explain to me why, from your theology, from natural law, from what this does to children and family structure, and all of the generations coming up behind us, guys, if someone would have asked me that, I would have had nothing. I could have quoted you maybe one verse, and then the conversation would have gone dead. And it wasn't because I was dumb. It was because I had never done the background work. I had never gone deeper than the surface of what I believed. I had a position, but it didn't come with a foundation. And guys, there's a big difference in that. A position is what you hold. A foundation is what holds you. A position can be argued away. A foundation cannot. Not because it's stubborn, but because it's been tested and it's held its ground. Mine, however, had never been tested. So when that moment came, I had nothing to give. And in 2009, when Iowa made that landmark decision in that state, my kids were right in the middle of it. They had grown up in Iowa. Their friends were out there celebrating. The culture was telling them that this was progress. This was love. Love is love. Remember that saying? This was the right side of history, they told my kids. And those kind of messages were everywhere. They were in the music. They were in their conversations at school. They were in what their friends were saying on the bus, at the lunch table, and online. And my daughter, she was only 9, maybe 10, like I said. She found me one evening. I don't remember exactly what I was doing, but I remember her standing in the doorway, arms at her side, the way kids stand when they're working up to something. She wasn't upset. She wasn't challenging me. She just had a question that she'd been carrying around, and she brought it to her dad because that's what she still had back then. Why is it wrong, Dad? And I snapped at her. Because it is. That's all you need to know. She went quiet and she walked away. I told myself I had parented her. I told myself I had done my job. I held the line. I said the right thing. What more did she need? What she needed was a reason. What she needed was a father who had done the work to know not just what is true, but why it is true, and who loved her enough to walk her through it. She needed me to sit down with her and say, here's what I believe, and here's the thinking behind it, and here's why it matters for you and your friends and the world you're going to live in. Instead, I gave her a wall, while the world, it gave her a doorway. The world sat with her questions. The world answered them. Not with good answers, but with bad ones, with wrong answers, with answers that led her away from everything I had raised her to believe in. But they were answers. They were answers I didn't give her. And she chose those answers over the wall that I had put up. Guys, she doesn't live in the faith today. I'm also not naive enough to think that one conversation did all that. But I do know that that moment was a part of it. I gave her a wall when she needed a doorway, and she found another door that wasn't her dad. And I lost ground that I never got back. I had the position. I didn't do the work. That's a form of indifference. Maybe even the most dangerous form of indifference, because it looks like leadership from the outside. You said the right thing. You took a stand. But when your kid needed you to lead them through the why, you had nothing to give. And nothing that's dressed up as authority is still nothing. Do the work. Know what you believe in deeply enough to give it to someone else. Because a conviction you can't explain is a conviction that won't transfer. And a conviction you can't transfer, well, it dies with you. Hold on tight, we got more. What happened in my house, it didn't just happen in my house. It didn't stay in my house. Multiply my story by a few million men, and you get the culture that we're living in right now. Men, they've gone quiet. And it didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, incrementally, one uncomfortable room at a time. Imagine a DEI trainer stands in front of a conference room full of absolutely capable men and says things that don't hold up, says things that you know aren't right, things that would fall apart in 30 seconds of honest examination. And the men in the room, they look down at the table. They nod along, not because they agree, because agreeing is easier than the conversation that would follow if they didn't just agree. So they sit there, convictions intact, yet their mouths are closed. And the thing that shouldn't go unchallenged goes unchallenged. Again, in room after room across thousands of companies. A little bit different situation. Priest, pastor, minister, church elder watches his piece of Christianity drift, his denomination drift. He sees the theology getting softer, the standards getting looser, the truth getting qualified until it barely resembles truth anymore. And he says nothing. Not because he doesn't see it. He sees it clearly. But conflict inside the church, well, it feels like betrayal. Like you're supposed to keep up with the peace. So he waits for the right moment, for someone else to take the lead. And while he waits, the church drifts further off into secular land. Let me give you another example. It's with a father who comes home and his teenage son has been getting ideas at school about gender, about identity, and what it means to be a man. And the father knows that something's off, but he doesn't have the language. He doesn't have the confidence that what he believes can hold up under any sort of scrutiny. So he changes the subject. He takes the easy road. He handles the surface and avoids the roots. And his son learns that dad doesn't go there. So he stops going to dad, just like my daughter stopped coming to me. None of these men think of themselves as cowards. They probably think of themselves as practical men, as patient men, as picking their battles wisely. But here's what they're actually doing. They're leaving. One decision at a time, one room at a time. They're vacating the space that men are supposed to occupy. They're physically present, yet they're spiritually absent. Their titles are intact, but their foundations are completely wiped out. And the space that gets left by men, that men leave empty, it gets filled. It always gets filled by whoever shows up. And the people who show up when men step back, guys, they're never neutral. They have an agenda. They have patience. And they have been waiting for exactly this moment. We look around at this gender ideology today. The media, the institutions that have drifted so far from their original purpose that they're barely even recognizable anymore. And we want to blame the people who push it. But the deeper problem is the men who should have stayed in the room, been in the room, and didn't stay in that room. They just were not in that room. We see it with the abortion narrative all the time. If you don't have a uterus, you can't have a comment. What kind of BS is that? But men believe it. Men actually quote it to me online. Now, there's a quote that's attributed to Edmund Burke. And I want to give it to you in the full first, which is, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I'd add 4 words to it, though. It just needs good men to do nothing at home first. Because that's where it starts. At the kitchen table, in the hallway, in the car on the way to school. A man who knows something's wrong, but doesn't know why well enough to say so, he says nothing. His kids learn that dad goes quiet on the hard stuff. They stop bringing him the hard stuff. The world fills with silence. That's where the indifference of men becomes the confusion of an entire culture. So what does it actually look like to build a foundation instead of just holding your position? I want to give you something you can take out of this episode today and be able to use. It's simply 4 steps. And it's one word to remember, and it's called hold. Not hold as in grip it tight and don't let go. Hold is the work you do on conviction before it gets tested. It's an acronym. You know I love my acronyms and frameworks. So H stands for hold it up. So H stands for hold it up. Before you can explain a conviction to your kid or anyone else, you have to examine it for yourself. You need to hold it up to the light. You need to turn it over. You need to ask yourself, is this actually mine? Or did I simply inherit it? You know, there's nothing wrong with inherited beliefs, but an inherited belief that you've never examined is simply a position. It's not a foundation. It will hold only long enough until someone pushes it, and then it won't. And that's what's happening to our kids in today's world. Now, let me give you a real example. When I left last year, my full-time W-2 job, I was scared to death about losing my insurance. Guys, I was absolutely scared to death. That belief, it ran deep, right? Insurance is a non-negotiable. Hell, people are out there working second jobs just to keep this stuff. And I had never once examined it. I just carried it. Yep, I got to have insurance. So I paid hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars every month to go to the doctors and pay hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars there and bills that I couldn't understand and everything else. Then here a couple months ago, my wife got sick with pneumonia, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be the one. This is going to be the one where insurance catches up with me, right? And we paid out of pocket. She had chest x-rays for pneumonia. I remember chest x-rays before with some of my family members. They would range in between like $800 to $1,500. We paid out of pocket. We told them that we were paying out of pocket, that we didn't have insurance. We paid out of pocket. It cost us $30 at urgent care. I had been organizing part of my professional life around that belief that I had that I never held up to the light. The moment that I did, it completely fell apart. Now, I won't go totally into it, but we do have some catastrophic coverage. I do pay a couple memberships into a couple different things, but I'll also tell you I don't believe in insurance anymore. Same thing happened with my beliefs around marriage, around about gender, about what a man is for and what he was put on this earth for. I had never held them up. So when my daughter asked me why, I had nothing for a foundation underneath them. I simply had this belief that was floating, unattached to any sort of foundation that could support the weight of this belief. Hold your convictions up before life forces you to try and defend them. The kitchen table with your kid is a much better place to do this work than the moment that you're standing there with absolutely nothing. That brings us to the O, which is own the why. Don't just know what you believe, know why you believe it. Where did it come from? Does it make sense? Did it come from faith? Did it come from your reasoning, your logic? Did it come from what you've seen in your own life? From what happens downstream when people get this belief wrong? You know, after that $30 bill, which wasn't a bill, it was a paid invoice, right? My wife started calling around. She started shopping for our medical coverage, for our pharmaceuticals, dentists, whatever. and comparing what we actually pay out of pocket versus what we were paying in premiums and copays, month after month, the answer has come back completely the same. 95% of the time, we're better off financially without the insurance premium. Now, I don't just believe in that. I can defend it. I can show you the bills. I can show you what they were like before versus what I pay now. I'm actually saving money, and I'm all about that. I can sit across from anyone and walk them through this math. That's the difference between a position and a foundation. The position is what you held before you actually looked into it. The foundation is what's left after you did the work. You know, I could tell you what I believed about my faith. I couldn't tell you why in any way that would hold up to a follow-up question from a 9-year-old. I simply couldn't. A lecture is a man protecting his position, right? Walking someone through the thinking is a guide. So when a man has to lecture on something, he's simply protecting a position. But when you walk your children or walk another person through your thinking and your why, now you've become a guide to that person. I want you to think about that a little bit. Because if you can't explain it, you simply don't own it yet. It's someone else's conviction. DEL stands for live it under pressure. So a conviction that has never been tested is simply a theory. Put yourself in rooms where your beliefs get challenged. Read the strongest arguments against what you believe. Have real conversations with real people who will push back. Now, I'm not telling you to go into that social media room, right? That group that is full of, the whatever crowd that is against your belief structure and go in there and pick a fight. That's not what I'm saying. But be open to real intelligent debate, not someone calling you a racist, a bigot, a Nazi, whatever they want to call you today, bootlicker, whatever it is. And have those real conversations with those people who will push back on you. Talk with your older kids. Talk to men in your brotherhood that have different beliefs. Talk to people who disagree with you. And let it get tested in these smaller moments so it doesn't collapse in the bigger ones, right? In the ones that really matter when your 9-year-old kid comes up and asks you a question. Because your kids are watching whether you just say you believe something or if you actually live out what you believe. They know that you're not perfect and you're not going to always be able to hit it perfectly. But they want to see you be consistent. They also want to see you with humility when you fall short, because that also teaches them integrity. And through that integrity is what opens up this conduit for us to be able to pass on our convictions. Guys, if your belief only holds up while you're comfortable, it's not ready to move down this conduit to other people. Which brings us to D, which is deploy it. Guys, this is the whole point and nothing but the point, so help me God. Everything in H, O, and L exists entirely so D, the deploy step, can actually happen. When I'm talking about deployment, I'm not talking about a lecture. It simply means to weave it into the daily life of your home. When the moment comes, and it always comes, you're ready to engage in conversation instead of snapping or going quiet. Let me tell you what this looks like at my house right now. My kids sometimes are hard to handle, just like everybody else's kids. But there's other times that they completely amaze me. I'm going to talk about my 9-year-old daughter that I have now. My daughter asked me something about the faith, about why the church teaches what it teaches, about something that she heard at school. They go to a homeschool co-op, right? So that school, and that it doesn't line up with what she's been raised to believe. And instead of ending the conversation, I actually open it. We sit down. I share with her what I know, but I also tell her where the edges of my knowledge actually are. And when I actually get up to those edges, I say, you know what? That's fine. That's fine. I don't have all the answers. But you know what? This gives us a great chance to figure it out together. We look things up sitting at the kitchen table, or I'll pull out my phone while we're sitting in a chair together. We've talked through things in the car on a drive to the grocery store. She's brought me questions I had to sit with for a day or two before I could answer them very well. Guys, that's part of the deployment process. It's not a formal lecture. It's not a formal lesson. It's not a long speech. It's a father who's able to stay in the conversation long enough to give his kids something that they can hold on to, that they understand, something that's real, something that they can believe in. And here's what that produces. Some nights I'll come downstairs, down the room that branches off into the hallway for her bedroom. And before I can even get to her bedroom door, I can hear my daughter inside. I've gone downstairs to pray with her before bed, but she's already praying on her own. Not because anybody told her to, not because we set a timer for her to pray. She just starts praying because she understands why she needs to pray. This little girl, she tells me about the history of the church that I have to go verify. She asks questions that stop me dead in my tracks. Not because they're all that hard to answer, but because they're the questions of someone who genuinely wants to understand. She doesn't want to just comply with church teachings or what I believe in. She wants to understand why. My 9-year-old daughter has more clarity in her faith than what I had in my 30s. And that didn't happen because I gave her a whole bunch of rules to live by. It happened because her mother and myself have really worked to give our children roots that our other children simply did not get. And me, I'm the same man, but I have an entirely different foundation, and it produces a completely different fruit. So hold, guys, hold it up. Own the why, live under pressure, deploy it to your kids. That's the work. And most men won't do it. Not because they don't care, because it's uncomfortable. Because it requires that admitting what they've been carrying might not be as solid as what they actually thought it was. Because it means sitting down with hard questions instead of shutting them down. But the men who actually do it, their kids have something to stand on. And when the world comes for their kids, which it will, it absolutely will, those kids are going to be able to hold the line. Most men never make it past H. And I want to tell you what it costs them over time. It doesn't start with a huge failure. It starts with the men's meeting at church where you let something slide because you don't have the language to push back. Just that one meeting. Then it's the conversation at work where you nod along because you can't quite articulate why something's wrong. Just one meeting. Then it's your kid asking you something about gender or sexuality or faith, and you feel that same low-grade uncertainty. And you change the subject. You give them the wall. You tell yourself you handled it. And what you just did is bring indifference into your home. If you cannot defend what you believe in publicly, you will eventually stop defending it in private. The shrinking is gradual. It's quiet. It doesn't feel like cowardice at the time. It feels like not making everything a fight. But your kids feel it. They feel it in you. When they learn that dad really doesn't go there, they stop going to dad. And the world, it fills with this silence. The indifference of men does not begin in culture. It begins in your home. That's the man I used to be. And I want to tell you what changed. About a decade ago, I stopped being a man who was only useful for the income he produced, and started working on every domain of my life. My faith has become deeper. I started asking about the things that I believed instead of just asserting them. And I made a simple decision about how I was going to parent the kids who came later. If they ask me something I don't know, I'm not going to snap anymore. I'll say, let's figure this out together. That's it. A simple, small decision. Everything you just heard in the whole framework, especially the D section, is what that decision produced. There's a line in Hosea that says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Most men read that and think it means ignorance. And sure, ignorance is a part of it. But I think it means something much more specific. That men who have convictions that they've never deepened, men who believe something but can't tell you why, men who hold a position but have never done the work to understand it well enough to pass it on. That's not knowledge. That's a feeling with a flag painted on it. The enemy of the sacred gentleman is not doubt. Doubt's honest. A man who doubts is a man who's still engaged. The enemy is the half conviction, the belief that never deepened, never tested, never worked into something that can carry weight when a 9-year-old child asks you why when you're sitting at the dinner table. Here's your assignment this week. And I'm telling you, it's an assignment, not a suggestion. I want you to pick one thing. Pick one thing that you believe is true about your faith or about manhood, about your marriage, about what you're building with your family, and ask yourself if you could explain the why to your kid. Let's take the example of the man being the head of the house. Can you defend that when someone like your kid asks you the why? Not just that it's true, but why it's true. What's underneath of it? What the implications are if it isn't. If you can, great, do it. Have that conversation before someone else does. If you can't, it's not a failure, man. It's simply a starting point. Sit down with your kid and say, hey, I believe this, and I want to understand it better to make sure that I fully believe it. You want to research this with me? You want to get down into it and have a conversation about it? You know, that moment, a father saying, I don't have every answer, but I'm willing to step into it with you to find them. That does more for a kid's formation than 100 correct answers. The world is offering your kids answers, guys. The world is right now. One thing that I found out about everything that I don't believe in is that they're playing the long game, right? Satan is playing the long game. He's patient, he's persistent, and he's well-versed with answers. The only counter that we have on this earth is a father who is willing to go deeper than the surface of what he believes and bring his kids with him. Guys, we're the head of the domestic church. Our job is so important with our children. So don't run from questions. Don't snap at them. Stand in the question. Stay in the room. Do the work so your kids aren't out there standing alone. Here's the honest question today, guys. Man to man. Mano to mano. Where are you in the hold right now? The acronym HOLD. Not where you want to be, but where are you actually at right now, right here? Have you held your convictions up and examined them? Or are you still carrying those same positions you inherited but never tested? Do you own the why, or do you have the what but nothing underneath of it for a foundation? Are you living your beliefs under pressure or only in the comfortable rooms? Have you deployed what you believe in to your kids along with the why? Or are you hoping that they just absorb it somehow by being in close proximity to you? Because I know what it looks like to have the conviction without the foundation. I lived it. I was certain. I was loud when I needed to be. And when my daughter asked me why, I had nothing. I had nothing. And I watched that nothing cost me ground that I was never able to get back. She asked me why, and I gave her this wall. And the world gave her better answers than I could, even though they were the wrong ones. They were harmful ones. They were still answers. And she chose those answers over the wall that I had put up. I can't undo that. But you can decide right now what you're going to do with the next question that comes your way. That's not a small thing. And for the first time, you have a framework. You have a path, not a feeling, not a vague conviction you can't explain, but a method on how to find that answer. Something that you can actually work as a process that will get you there. And when you work it, your kids will get a foundation instead of this wall that I gave mine. Your home gets a man who can lead it. Your community gets someone who shows up and stays in the room. That's what's on the other side of this. That's what's available right now. Brother, you're ready for this. And the sacred code is where it gets done. If you have kids at home and you just realized that you can't fully explain why you believe what you believe, you already know you need this. That gap isn't just a knowledge problem. It's a formation problem, guys. And it doesn't close on its own. You have to work at it. Now, the Sacred Code, it's a 12-week masculine formation program. There's different levels of it that we can talk about, but ultimately it's not self-help. It's not a podcast series with a workbook. It's formation. It works through your identity, your alignment, your vision, your discipline, your brotherhood and legacy in a very structured, accountable environment that other men have done the same work in, including myself. You'll come out knowing what you believe, but more importantly, you'll know why. You'll come out with a foundation, not just a position. And that foundation will show up in your home with your kids in the rooms where it matters most. Before the next question that comes that you're not ready for. If you're interested, drop me an email. Hit me up on social media. If you're not ready for that entire full program, talk to me about the Knight's Order. It's really the front door. It's the brotherhood of men doing this work together. Come and find your people. You haven't been called to a comfortable life. You are, however, called to a faithful one. The culture is confused because men have gone quiet. They've become dormant. And when men went quiet, because somewhere along the way they decided that holding a position was the same thing as holding a foundation. It's not, guys. One is something that you say. The other is something that you become. And it starts at home. It always starts at home. The man who won't engage the hard question with his kid, he won't engage anywhere else at a level that he needs to engage. The man who builds his foundation at home, though, who does the work, who knows the whys, who stays in the room when his kid asks the hard thing, that man shows up differently everywhere else. His presence changes the temperature of every room that he walks into. Your kids are watching what you do when the questions come. They're learning from you, not from your words, but from your posture. Whether you run, whether you snap, or you stay in the room to do the work with them. Evil doesn't need you to join it. Just not being on their side is not good enough. Evil just needs you to go quiet at home. Don't give it that. Don't give it what it wants. You are the son of the Most High before you are anything else. And sons of the Almighty, they do not run from the fray. They don't perform their convictions. They build these foundations that I talked about, and they stand. First in their homes, then everywhere else. Go and do the work. Your kids need what's on the other side of it. I'm Steve Baumgartner. This is the Sacred Gentleman. Go and build something that lasts. We'll see you next time.